Nigel Farage was challenged on Good Morning Britain about the comments about Muslims in the UK, which he made on Sky News. I'll run the relevant bit here into the next bit, which is not relevant to the subject, but it'll all become clear.
The most recent polling on this was done by JL Partners, a very reputable company. And this is what it showed, and this is what I'm worried about. It showed that 23% of 18 to 24-year-old young Muslims living in Britain think that jihad is a good thing. Now, that, of course, is not a British value in any way at all, and that's a very, very disturbing trend. It's particularly prevalent amongst the young. We have a problem, and just to say it's Islamophobic or it's this or it's that is to ignore the fact we have a very real problem.
Yes, you also said in the interview, didn't you, that you could take anyone to a particular street or two in Oldham.
He was talking about that poll of attitudes of Muslims in Britain compared to the native population, where I thought that the most startling finding was that more Muslims in the UK were positive about Islamic terrorist groups than were negative. That is a bit extraordinary. The bit he mentioned was the jihad bit, with much greater Muslim favourability compared to the British and much less negativity than the rest of us. Personally, I think that Hamas bit is far more telling, as it compares Hamas positivity amongst the Muslims themselves to negativity. The methodology, if you look at it, seems unremarkable, and the people behind it are a respected polling firm, so you wouldn't expect anything untoward to be going on. Why do I say this?
And just to say it's Islamophobic or it's this or it's that is to ignore the fact we have a very real problem.
Yes, you also said in the interview, didn't you?
And just home in there on his immediate rebuttal.
We have a very real problem.
Yes.
Did that swiftly fading "yeah" seem to be cut off at all? That is because it was cut off, it was edited. I couldn't find the original anywhere online. They seem to have wiped it, but it still exists, or it still existed when I looked for it on ITV Catch-Up. So I filmed it with my smartphone, hence the bad quality.
And just to say it's Islamophobic or it's this or it's that is to ignore the fact we have a very real problem.
Yes, but the poll that you just quoted from has been very heavily criticised. You say it's a reputable company, but it's been criticised as being a self-selecting poll, that people were basically drawn in through a series of clicks, and by the time they got to register their opinion, they'd already made their minds up. It was a kind of self-selecting, as I say.
So what they cut out, leaving that fading "yeah" of "yes, but the poll," etc., was him laying into the poll's methodology, saying it was basically junk. And it has to be junk, because it says that Muslims in the UK are a community apart, and that cannot be allowed to stand. So the fact that more Muslims in the UK are favourable to Hamas terrorism than not is because the poll is rubbish, because otherwise more Muslims in the UK are favourable to Hamas terrorism than not. Unfortunately, this happened 3 days later.
We'd just like to clarify a story that we did on Tuesday this week. During an interview with Nigel Farage, we mentioned a survey that he had quoted. The 1,000 people who were polled responded to a questionnaire while they were online. Now, we described that poll as self-selecting, but in fact, JL Partners, who carried out the poll, have told us that participants were chosen very carefully to ensure a mix of ages, locations and educational backgrounds, and that their methodology was in line with the highest industry standards.
Oh dear. Yes, he did say it was self-selecting, but he described it as a few things more than just that. He said, "You said it was a reputable company," but implying that it wasn't a reputable company, and he said that people had been drawn in by a series of clicks who had already made up their mind, meaning that clickable content had drawn people in who wanted to make Muslims look bad. Click here if you want to stick it to the muzzy wuzzies or something. Probably a bit less exaggerated than that. Evidently then, JL Partners, the polling firm, had got in contact with ITV to say retract this make-believe, possibly with hints about the consequences of slander as well. So ITV snipped out the fake bit.
We have a very real problem.
Yes, but the poll that you just quoted from.
We have a very real problem.
Yes, you also said in the interview, didn't you?
Issued a retraction, and you're left wondering where it was that Richard Madley got his "ah yes, but you see it's basically all fake" line from, since it wasn't. It was true, and what he said was false. You can imagine ITV assistant producers scuttling around like headless chickens saying, find something, anything to rebut this, doesn't matter what it is, doesn't matter if it's true or not, we'll deal with the consequences later, but stop him saying this. And we have to thank ITV, of course, for their desperation to delegitimise anything that paints Muslims in the UK as anything other than the second coming of Christ, since it failed and therefore yields the opportunity to reinforce what it was the non-fake news said. Did you miss it? More of them in the UK are favourable to Hamas, which is a designated terrorist organisation, than those who are negative towards Hamas. We can thank Good Morning Britain for getting it wrong and reminding everyone about it in the process.
We mentioned a survey that he had quoted. Now, we described that poll as self-selecting, but in fact, JL Partners, who carried out the poll, have told us that participants were chosen very carefully to ensure a mix of ages, locations and educational backgrounds, and that their methodology was in line with the highest industry standards.